Okay, 2000 with black. Unfortunately, we get another black. But at these higher ratings, I need more time to explain my moves. I want to play... Let's play a very conceptual opening. Let's play a Caro, which is also what I played against the cheer yesterday. Yeah, d4, d5. C takes d5. Okay, so bishop d3. So this is the exchange Caro. This is one of the most reputable lines against the Caro. It's very solid. Basically, it is very reminiscent of a London. White puts the bishop on d3, generally plays the move c3, and then the other bishop comes out to f4. Black has several viable setups in this variation, but most of them revolve around finding a home for the bishop on c8. If you know anything about this line, you know that in the Caro, much like in the French, the light squared bishop often does not have a good home. Now, if you think about it, if white plays the move h3 here, the development of the light squared bishop is heavily restricted. So in my opinion, the soundest line for black is not to play the natural knight c6, which is what most people would play if they're seeing the position for the first time, but actually to develop the other knight first, knight f6. And then if white plays the move c3, then you develop your bishop first. Okay, white plays h3. And now we're going to have to revert to a different system, but it is worth a shot to go knight f6. Now, white has played h3. We can develop our other knight to c6. And if white plays c3, we have a very interesting line that I think gives black a super active game. It's the move e5. White has two moves here. There's knight f3 and there's c3. And white has played c3. And the principal move, of course, is e7, e5, because we are basically trying to punish white for not developing their knight early enough. Now, I've analyzed this. This is not just, I'm not spitballing this. This is real stuff. e5 is theory. And we get, most likely, if white plays de, an IQP structure. We get an isolated queen pawn on d5. We haven't had that many IQPs in the speedrun, so this is going to be a good chance for me to talk a little bit about handling the situation with an IQP. We've played against the IQP many times, and you kind of, I think, know the drill by now. Knight f3, good move. That is, in my opinion, the best line. Okay, so now we need to decide what to take. We take the bishop, do we take the knight? Do we do neither? Well, the bishop pair is always a good idea when you're trying to stay active. Between knight takes f3, knight takes d3, it makes a lot more sense to eliminate the light squared bishop. Bishop, knight takes d3, check. Okay, queen takes d3 coming. Okay, so now the main thing that we need to decide, first of all, is where we want to put our dark squared bishop. And we have three viable candidates. We can play bishop c5, bishop d6, or bishop e7. I mean, bishop e7 seems like the most passive of the moves. Bishop e7, black is slightly worse, very passive move. So bishop c5 comes to mind as perhaps the most active looking move, but it has two flaws. Bishop c5 has two flaws. So if you look carefully, you'll notice that white has a check on b5, which does not win the bishop. It does not win the bishop, because black can retreat the knight to d7 and simultaneously defend the bishop on c5. But the move knight d7 is very awkward. You're withdrawing the knight, you're blocking in your light squared bishop, not something that you really want to allow. That essentially leaves us with only one square. And that is the d6 square. And bishop d6 is, if I remember correctly, the best move in this position. Now, this is a nice compromise. The bishop here is safe. It's also aiming at the king side, so it's on a relatively active square. White's probably going to castle. We're going to castle, obviously. And here, the principled move for white is, of course, bishop c1 to g5. Like, if white wants to really fight for an advantage, I think bishop g5 is the way to do it, and then we're going to sacrifice a pawn. We're going to sack our IQP for an open position and a bishop pair. If bishop g5 happens, we are going to play the move h6, which, as you should be able to determine, is in fact a pawn sacrifice. But let's wait for white to make a move, because bishop g5 is not forced. You might look at this and say, well, what do I know about IQP, evaluating IQP positions? Well, I know that it's very important to determine who has control of the square in front of the isolated queen pawn, and that is definitely white. But black has a couple of redeeming factors. The first thing is we have the bishop pair, and the position is pretty open. The second thing is that we have nice piece coordination. We have a good bishop. The other bishop is also aiming at the king side. So the fact that white has control of d4 is compensated by our bishop pair. Let's put it that way. Okay, so here 2 moves come to mind. White is quote-unquote threatening to take on f6 and then take on d5 after that. And we're actually going to encourage that. We are going to play the move h6. We're going to play the move h6. We are going to encourage white to take on f6. Is white better? I think the position is very close to equal, but our opponent is playing this very, very well. He's playing all of the topical, most testing moves for sure. Yeah, so after bishop takes f6, the tactically minded among you might notice that we do have gf6, setting the dirty trap that queen takes d5 loses the queen and bishop h2 check. But that counteracts the spirit of the position. gf6 is a terrible move. White's obviously not going to take on d5, and we are going to be left with a ruined pawn structure. No, g takes f6 is out of the question. So white is a big choice here, and that's why our opponent is thinking whether to accept the sacrifice, take the pawn, but give up the other bishop, or to play a move that annoys me a little bit more, which is bishop h4. Okay, white takes, we take back. And, of course, having said A, you have to say B, so it makes sense to take the pawn. Now, why did we sacrifice the pawn? Well, first of all, we get white's second bishop. 2 bishops against 2 knights is a pretty good arrangement in an open board. So now we continue with a very natural move. This move, your hand should be reaching to play this move. Your hand should just be reaching to play this move. As some of you might think, oh, let's develop our bishop to e6. That blunders the bishop on d6. And I think I called it. Some of you are saying bishop e6. That blunders the bishop on d6. So the best thing to do is move the rook from f8 to d8. Classic move, setting up a x-ray against the queen, threatening bishop h2 check and forcing the queen away from the center. Now, there's a bunch of tactics that derive from the fact that white has not completed his development, his or her development. The knight is still on b1, and we need to try to exploit that as much as we can. We need to try to squeeze the juice out of the position before white finishes the development. How do we do that? So what that basically means is we need to develop with tempo, we need to continue the initiative, and we need to not worry about giving up more pawns. So all of the arrows are pointing to one move and one move only, and that is, of course, bishop f5. I'm not even looking at the b7 pawn. Let our opponent take it. If queen takes b7, we might be able to go rook a b8 and take on b2, and that looks mighty promising. I'm not even really calculating queen takes b7. That just seems way too brazen. Way too brazen. And there's tons of tactical tricks here. A lot of people would play queen e2 in this position. That loses the game to bishop d3. Again, variations on a theme. This bishop h2 idea comes in again. Queen 8. Okay, queen e3. Probably the best move. Probably the best move. We can still play bishop d3 here, but it loses some of its effectiveness because white is not forced to take. So let's calculate. Bishop d3. I suppose white plays rook e1. Then we can involve the other bishop and put it on f4. That looks pretty promising. But let's evaluate our other candidate moves as well. So what else can we come up with here? Well, we have the move rook e8. But rook e8 I'm not enthralled with because white will play queen e3 to d4, offering the queen trade and gaining a very important tempo for development. In the time that we take to refuse the queen trade, white is going to have the time to develop the knight to d2. So hopefully that logic makes sense. Now, I briefly considered the sack on h3. I don't see any follow-up after gh. I think white is safe there. But queen g6 succumbs to a very typical idea that you should be very much aware of. Why is queen g6 bad? Who can tell me? Yeah, g5 is actually very interesting here. Yeah, knight h4. Right? Queen g6, knight h4 leads to the trade, and the trade is obviously bad for black. You know the drill. Let me think a little bit more. Okay, so I have several other interesting ideas. The first is a very subtle move. It's a move that probably is not occurring to most of you, which is okay. And that's what I see here is the d3 square. The d3 square is a weakness in white's position. Well, we've already discussed bishop d3. That's a very good move. I think that's probably one of black's best moves, if not the best move. And we'll go back to it in a second. The other interesting thing we can do is drop the bishop back from d6, bishop c7. The idea is to drive the rook up to d3 and then potentially double on the d file and try to pressure white that way. Also, I think a very interesting idea. And the second thing bishop c7 does is it prepares to reroute the bishop to a nice b6 square where it will x-ray the king and exert more pressure on white's position. So I think we have a concrete approach here, which is bishop d3. That's an attempt to go for white's throat. Or we can play a more subtle move and play bishop c7. I'm feeling tactical. I want us to go bishop d3. I think bishop d3 is still the most promising continuation. My intuition is just screaming to play this move. It just feels that bishop d3 just feels right, you know? And hopefully it feels right to you too. Because bishop f4 is going to follow, and the bishops we're really all over the place here with our bishops in a good way. Yeah, what we are trying to do is really pounce before white completes their development. Bishop c7 was pretty spicy as well, but it's hard to make a choice in such situations because there's like 3 or 4 tempting options, and you just have to trust your intuition in such case. If you shouldn't get too bogged down in spending all of your time, because chances are the actual engine evals are going to be pretty similar. I can bet you a silver dollar that like bishop c7, bishop d3 are probably similarly evaluated by the engine. So wasting all of your time when the chances are that both moves are feasible is just not worth it. You need to make the judgment call at some point. It's better sooner rather than later. So bishop d3 has a couple of ideas. It attacks the rook. The bishop is untouchable. And mainly it paves the way for the other bishop to drop into f4, paying the queen a visit. And when we put the bishop on f4, the good thing about the placement of the bishop on f4 is that it is cutting straight through the heart of white's position. And it's making it harder for white to develop his knight to d2. That's the idea of bishop d3. And we keep the initiative going because it's a move that's played with tempo. Is rook d1 here feasible? The way I see it, white has 2 moves. Rook d1, rook e1. Yeah, rook d1. Okay, now bishop f4, as we discussed. Now, what's interesting is that white is already in big trouble, I think, because if queen e1, if the queen drops back to e1, the queen actually has only 2 squares, believe it or not. Only 2. There's c5 and there's e1. Queen e1 loses the game to rook e8, and the queen is literally trapped. Literally trapped. It's crazy. I mean, you can see how powerful this initiative is. Queen c5 is forced, but then the queen is really in no man's land. And after queen c5, we will have to try to continue making it hard for white to complete his development. Yeah, the bishop pair is just can be so strong in an open board. The game is not over after queen c5. The game continues after queen c5. We'll have to find a very accurate response. But let's wait for white to make the decision. So far, so good. It's not quite crushing. I think it's much better for black, but after queen c5, we'll need to play accurately because I'm struggling a little bit to find the killer blow there. Is rook takes d3 defensible? No. Queen takes d3 maybe is the lesser evil to give up the queen for the rook and the piece, but the problem is in the ensuing position we still have a very strong initiative. Queen c5 played. Okay, let's think. I'm going to take like a couple of seconds in silence to try to process the candidate moves here. Yeah, so I'm thinking of bishop e2. Thinking of the move bishop e2. Rook takes d8, rook takes d8, knight d4 is the line that I'm currently stuck on. Oh man, we have bishop c1 there. But then the queen moves and defends the pawn. There's got to be a move in that position. It just looks so overwhelming. Of course, we can equalize with bishop e5, but it's not interesting. b6. What about b6? Let's see. Throwing in... Yeah, well, b6... I'm trying to figure out if we should throw in b6. That's the million-dollar question. b6, I guess the queen goes to b4. b6, the queen goes to b4. Yeah, then we have a choice. I guess we can keep harassing. We can play a5. It feels right to play b6. I can't quite explain why, because there's no actual reason. It just feels right to banish the queen to a worse square. It feels pretty safe and fundamentally sound to do this. So let's play b6. Also, queen h5 loses to bishop g6, and there's going to be a mate threat on d1. Remember that even though white has created luft for his king, even though white has played h3, we are still controlling the luft square, so there's still going to be back rank problems. Okay, now we're going to continue our strategy by playing a5 and continuing to push the queen around. Oh man, there's some cool lines there, but they don't quite work out. Queen a3, okay. I'm actually happy to see queen a3. I thought queen b3 was more annoying. I think I see what we should do. I think I see the win. So here's how I'm thinking about this. Oh crap, a knight? Amazingly, if we go bishop e2 now, it's the same problem. Takes, knight d4. Gosh, it looks so promising there. But then we can go queen g6 and just make a quiet move. So hard to find the actual killer blow. I'm also, yeah, bishop c2 takes, knight d4. I'm not sure how bishop c2 is better. Oh, but bishop c2 does have the advantage of keeping like everything open, of keeping the e-file open. So there, queen e5. Gosh, he's got this crazy defensive resource in certain positions. So I'm thinking of bishop e2, bishop e4, bishop c2, or bishop c4. All of these are feasible attacking moves. Bishop e4, I'm concerned about knight b to d2. Then we go bishop c2 and white goes rook c1. And somehow, white is still holding on there. But what we can also do is we can play bishop b7. Oh, I see. Oh my god, there's just so much cool stuff here. There's a tactic that doesn't work. That comes ridiculously close to working. What about bishop d6? Yeah, but bishop d6, queen a4. That actually helps white. We can also try to trap the queen. Bishop c2. Takes. Knight d4. Oh my god! Wait, there's a brilliant idea. Oh my god, if this works, this is amazing. Okay, bishop c2. So we're going to do this. Here's the idea. Bishop c2. The point is to trap the queen with bishop d6. We have a secondary concept, which is to drop this bishop back. The queen is trapped. Now, it's sort of trapped. White does have the move b2, b4, but after a takes b4, the whole queen side collapses, and that should be good. So what's going to happen here, I'm hoping, is that white's going to take the rook. If he doesn't take the rook, that would be like a super mature decision. But I don't think that he will. I think he'll take the rook. Then white will play the move knight f3 to d4 in order to block the d-file. This is what I've been butting up against. And then we suddenly drop our bishop back to d6. Forcing b4, we play a takes b4. And I feel like in that resulting position, the combination of the collapsing queenside combined with the fact that white is not developed at all means that we're just completely winning there. No, I did not see this immediately. This took me a very long time to see. I knew that the queen was almost out of squares. Conceptually, I understood that. But to find bishop f4 to d6, that's an invisible move. That's a retreating move out of nowhere that blocks the only open file. I guess the e file is also open, but we are trying to attack down the d file, so it's cognitive dissonance almost to play bishop d6. So rook d4, rook d4, rook d4, rook d4. Okay, that's probably a good move. So we can play as our plan bishop d6, b4, a takes b4, queen b2, and in that position, I think we can just drop our bishop back, or we can play bishop. Oh, wow, but no, it doesn't quite work. We can also play rook takes d4, but then white plays c takes d4. Man, this is amazing defense by white. No, we should play bishop d6. We should play bishop d6. That's what we should do. And I guess now white goes b4. We can also play bishop takes b4, and it almost works. b4, bishop takes b4. Oh my gosh, there's just so many lines I'll delve into after the game. Bishop takes b4. I think that might work. Oh, there's a beautiful line there. Yes, b4. So bishop takes b4. And if it's too complex, I will look at all of this after the game. So don't get discouraged and think this is way too complicated. I promise that I will spell out all of my calculations after the game. So here's what I'm calculating. Bishop takes b4. Bishop takes b4. But the problem is he can move his queen. He doesn't have to take the bishop. Arg. Okay, so then let me think. No, but I think actually bishop takes b4, queen b2 is incredibly problematic. Okay, then we can play bishop takes b1, but that's not what I was looking for. Wowza. Just incredible defense by our opponent. Exquisite. A takes b4, queen b2, bishop drops back to g6. Our opponent plays c takes b4. We play... maybe we can play bishop f4 there. Okay, thank you, Zazy. I think this is the most promising continuation. It seems to me that this is the most promising continuation. I'll spell out all my calculations after the game. So this is a double attack against the queen. The queen has to move. And you might be tempted after queen b2 to take on b1. You might be tempted to take on b1, but I think it is fundamentally wrong to give away our light-scored bishop. I think our light-scored bishop, which exerts pressure on the knight, is a very valuable piece. And I don't think that we should give it away. I think we should drop it back to g6. And here, I was spending most of my time calculating the brazen c takes b4, which looks crazy. To open up the diagonal like this is nuts. But amazingly, I couldn't find anything super concrete there. And I have a feeling the way our opponent has been playing, I have a feeling he's going to play it. It does look absolutely crazy, and we have like 400 attempts, but I don't see a single clearly winning continuation there. Oh, I mean, amazing. Amazing defense by our opponent. If we play... My idea was to play bishop c7. But unfortunately, he's going right down the one line, which I couldn't resolve. But I still have some ideas. I think we're going to start... Oh, it also doesn't work. Oh my gosh. There. Should be 4. You can also play king h7. That's an interesting move. I think we're going to go bishop c7. Now, this obviously sets a trap. If takes, we have checkmate on d1. Let me tell you what I'm worried about here. I'm most worried about two different things. If white takes and goes knight c3, I'm worried about that. And then there's this crazy move, knight b to d2, just developing the knight. And there are some ridiculous complications there, but I couldn't get them to work. He does take, okay. Now, knight c3 is forced. Knight c3 is forced here, because otherwise we win. Oh, and there's an incredible idea after knight c3, which doesn't really do the trick. Amazing. Let's see what our opponent ends up doing here. So I think after knight c3, we should switch to positional gear. And I think after knight c3, what we should do... Oh, wait, knight c3, we have a move, though. Oh, we might have a tactic. Knight c3, I think we have a win. I think rook takes was a mistake. So what's the move after knight c3? I didn't see this move for some reason until just now. It's simple. The knight is in trouble. Now, some of you might say, oh, we have bishop e5, but no, we don't, because the knight on f3 stares at the pawn. But we have the move rook to d3 attacking the knight. And the knight doesn't have any good squares. If knight a4, we have a beautiful winning tactic. If he plays it, we'll go through it. The most resilient move is rook c1, but then that rook on c1 can be harassed by the bishop. We can play bishop f4, or some of you might notice that we have an exchange sacrifice on f3, after which the king is wide open, and there might be checkmate. But rook c1 is definitely resilient. Rook c1 is definitely resilient. And then we play bishop f4, rook c2. I'm trying to figure out where the win is in that position. There, 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 there. Gosh, it's so hard. Bishop d3. Okay, I'm just going to have to calculate in silence for a bit. Because I'm... yeah, frick, rook c1 played. We're so close to being winning here. Bishop f4, rook c2. Queen takes c3 almost works, but it doesn't. Bishop f4, rook c2. Takes, takes. There, there. There, there. Bishop f4, rook c2, bishop e5, no. Bishop e4, rook c2, bishop e4, maybe. Oh my god, that's a crazy idea, but it doesn't work. Knight d1. Huh. Let's think. So if we sack the exchange, he takes it. This is one of the richest games we played in the Speedrun. Okay, let's start with bishop f4. This has to be the move. This must be the move. And then we just need to find one more winning move. I just can't seem to figure it out after bishop f4, rook c2. Just can't seem to figure out the winning move there, and we have no time. Maybe it's bishop e4, but then he has knight e1. Okay, maybe it's a simple move. I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna play a very subtle move, bishop f5. I want to play bishop f5. I'm sure there's a win now. This is like no question that there's probably multiple wins, but I cannot find them. So you'll see what the point is in a second. So the point of this move is to set up a tactic. And the tactic that I'm trying to set up is rook takes f3, gf, and queen g6 check to fork the king and the rook on c2. So that when we take the rook, the bishop is defended. But the other thing I was calculating here is what happens after knight e1. And there I calculated the following line. So if the knight drops back to e1, we drop our rook back to d8. Then we open up an attack on the rook on e2. That rook on c2 has only one square. Sorry, I said e2. It has to go to e2 from c2. Then in that position, we drop our other bishop from f4 to e5 in order to pin the knight. And after rook e3, I think we have rook d1. But I'm not totally positive that that's the win. It might not be the right approach, by the way. Damn it, he finds it. Rook d1, bishop d... Ah! No, we have a simpler win, though, I think. No, I think we have a... Oh, no, we don't, because the knight defends. Ugh. Bishop e5, rook e3, bishop d4, rook d3, queen e5. This is amazing defense. Rook e2. Bishop e5, rook e3, rook c8. No, we simply have rook c8. No, this is winning. I think that's it. Bishop e5. Bishop e5. Rook e3, defending the knight, and then just rook d8 to c8. And we win the knight on c3. We don't do anything tactical. We just go after the pinned knight. Bang. Bang. It's as simple as that. And often these simple moves are the ones that are hardest to see. You just attack the knight another time, and I don't think... And the thing is, even if he takes on e5, we take back, and the knights are actually forked. So white can't even get an exchange for this. White literally loses the knight on c3, and then it should be easy. Yeah. Honestly, one of the most interesting games I've ever played in the speedrun, and obviously a lot of mistakes were made in this game. Maybe not a lot, but... One second. Yeah, but knight d5, folks. Knight d5, don't stop calculating. Don't stop calculating. Knight d5 looks fancy, but we just take the queen on b2. Knight takes f6 check, and then we come back and take the knight, and we're up a piece. So don't get intimidated by these moves that look go knight d5 and we're in trouble. No, it's knight d5, bishop takes b2. And if white goes anything else, we just take on c3 with the rook or the bishop. So we will check some of the key positions with the engine. My intuitive guess would be that in a position like this, we probably have more than one win. Dr. Lord Mayonnaise with the 5 subs. Let's get the hype rolling. Appreciate it, Dr. Lord Mayonnaise. My man. No, the queen sack did not work. I'll show you after the game. The queen sack did not work. The queen sack did not work. Yeah, it's over. Kudos to our opponent. Definitely legit and super good defense. So what I'm going to try to do is spell out each logical step to my calculation. I'll show you everything I calculated. Like those moments when I was silent for 30, 45 seconds, I'll try to spell out what I was struggling with. So buckle up because the lines are going to be complex, but if you follow carefully, it's like the Game of Thrones plot. Like you should be able to understand every move. And if you don't understand a single move, just ask in the chat or ask me to repeat the concept behind it. So I want everybody to understand every step of the logical process. Okay, A3. Now let's try to finish the game clinically. So generally, when you have a situation with an extra piece, you should try to simplify. So I think it makes a good deal of sense to play rook takes c3. Notice that it is important that we have Luft. If we did not have Luft, white would have queen takes c3, and we wouldn't have been able to take because of back rank mate. So you see the importance of having Luft. Luft means air in German, but it refers specifically to the creation of all. So here, if you want to be very, very clinical, what should we do? What's the easy move that we know leads immediately to a win? Yeah, queen e6, queen e5, either of these moves is good. Queen e6 is even better because it not only forces a queen trade, but it keeps the bishop stationed on c3 to attack the knight once the queens are traded. Then, if you turn your attention to this situation over here, a3, b4, and b6, at some point in the near future, it is worth going b6, b5, a technique you should be familiar with called the deep freeze, in order to freeze white's pawns on their current squares. And you do that in order to be able to pick them off with your dark squared bishop. So, to keep this knight as restricted as possible, let's take with a pawn, because the bishop slices the knight's potential retreating squares on d3 and c2, forces the knight to stick to the king side. Now we have two winning approaches here. The first is to basically try to trade the bishop for the knight and go bishop to e4. Bishop to e4 is probably the most clinical move. The second approach is to play b5, the move that I mentioned. I want to show you how the deep freeze works, so we're going to go b5. Clinical until the end, right? Not giving white any chances to hold. And then we go right for the pawns and we pick them off. And we notice that the pawn on b5 can always be protected by the other bishop. So if necessary, we can put the other bishop on d3 in order to protect the pawn. In fact, we're going to do that right now to drive the king back to g1. And now that we've already deep frozen the pawns, there is no hurry to go bishop b2. No hurry at all. So let's go bishop e2, trying to trade the knight. Look at the total paralysis and domination exerted by the bishop. We take the knight, and now we play bishop b2. And that's it. Resigns. Okay. So here the simplest is to move the bishop away, pave the way for the pawn. b4, king d5, b3, etc. It's all over. Daniel lost. Okay, I need to go pee again after this game, and then we'll delve in. b3, b2, b1, queen. Hopefully resigns here. Nope. All right, the rest of the game without comment. Okay. once the king is cut off along the first rank, the easiest is to just bring your king up rather than making 2 queens. Don't pre-move in such positions. A good mistake would be to pre-move queen c2. Not how would we want to do it. All right, I will be right back, and then we'll start analysis. The remark I want to make on a general level as we jump into the game is that when we were like 14, 1500, most wins could be categorized by theme. Like each game had a clear theme, a clear narrative, a clear arc. Now, because people are better in the opening, and as a result of that, the middle games are more complicated, you can't sort of superimpose a storyline on every game. Most games are just going to be messy, dirty. They're going to be dirty not in the sense of like dirty flagging, but dirty in the sense of like impure, complicated, mistakes, hard to handle positions. And that's just part of it, right? That's part of the chess journey, is starting to be able to handle such positions with a certain degree of success. Thank you, Judd White, for the bits. So let's jump in. Caro-Kann-Exchange variation. So bishop d3 is an important move to start with. Most beginners who don't know much about the Caro-Kann, they play the move knight c3. We face this move in the speedrun. I have documented the flaws of this move many times. The main one is that it keeps the d4, makes the d4 pawn extremely weak, and it is critical, mission critical for white to keep the d4 pawn as well protected as possible. Knight c3 is a very instructive mistake that most beginners tend to make. And perhaps even you've played this move. But after, for example, knight c6, already the pressure on d4 becomes very annoying. So bishop d3 is better than c3, because if you were paying attention to what I was saying earlier in the game, c3 allows the extra option of the bishop developing to f5. Actually, c3 is fine because bishop f5 ends up being inaccurate, if I remember correctly, due to queen b3 attacking both of these pawns. But why give black the additional option of developing the light square bishop? Okay, the heck is c3? Was my explanation unclear? 7 point. Do you want me to repeat the explanation? The point of c3 is to create a pawn chain and to make sure that the d4 pawn is as well protected as possible. That's really all it is. That's the point of putting the pawn on c3. So bishop d3. Knight f6. And once again, the point of knight f6 is to try to stick the bishop out on g4 as quickly as possible. So h3 is less common than c3. And after c3, bishop g4, we get a position that has been very, very popular among 2,700 plus GMs in the last couple of years. This is like super topical. Super topical. You had some new in chess yearbook articles written on this. This is where a lot of the theoretical discussion is at in the Caro-Kann. And white generally goes queen d1 to b3. This is a move that you should always be aware of whenever the bishop leaves c8 in such positions. Judd White, bishop d3 weakens d4 less than knight c3 because of the pawn on c3. You don't need any other pieces to be defending d4 because you already have a pawn defending another pawn, which is the best way to ensure the long-term safety of a pawn. So what you're thinking is, oh, bishop d3 blocks the queen, and so the pawn is weak. But the d4 pawn, yes, it's undefended at this present moment, but then on the next move, white's going to play c3 and protect it. Okay, so the theoretical discussion is here. Now, black has 2 moves. Actually, black has 3 moves. Queen c7, queen d7, and queen c8 are all possible, but most of the grandmasters recently have been going queen to c7. Now the main move is knight e2. And just like in the French, black often tries to get rid of this bishop. So bishop takes e2 is the most popular move. And I think according to the most recent assessments, white is a tiny bit better in these positions, but black is incredibly solid. Right? Black has absolutely no targets. Look how solid black's structure is. The development is good. So Caro-Kann players typically do not mind these types of positions with black. Is bishop f4 playable here? Now, bishop f4 is a very instructive mistake. It loses. Queen takes f4, queen takes b7, and queen c1 checkmate. There was a very famous game about 20 years ago. This game made the rounds. I even heard about it when it was played. It was an early Fabiano Caruana game when Fabi was like 2,300, I want to say. So this was 2003. I was just starting to play chess. I had made one of my first trips to the Mechanics Institute Chess Club in San Francisco. And back then, the Pro Chess League was called the US Chess League. And I remember the director, John Donaldson, talking about Caruana beating Drake Wang, who was a national master from San Francisco, in 10 moves. And he succumbed to a very, very similar trap. Here it is. Here's the game. All right. So Fabiano against Drake Wang. 2,100 Fabi. So Caro-Kann. Also a Caro, but that's a total coincidence. Oh, it's not totally the same thing, though. Oh, I apologize. I was wrong, but this is still very similar. You'll see why this rang a bell. So Fabi plays queen g4, queen f6, bishop g5, queen g6, e takes d5, and black plays e takes d5. I don't know why this reminded me of that, but queen c8 mate was blundered by black. So that's all there is to it. So this made the rounds back then. But very similar the mating construction is exactly the same. The mating construction is exactly the same. Very easy to miss. A bishop f4 is not a move. So c3 is the most popular move, but white played h3, knight c6, c3. There is also the move knight f3, and if you've watched all of the speedrun games, you might remember that we did face this line a very long time ago. And back then I showed you the best way to deal with the development of this bishop is to play, it's not to play e6. Most people who don't know what to do, they play e6. And here black is worse. Here black is worse because your bishop sucks. So my favorite way to deal with this is to play g6. Dual purpose move. The first is, of course, to fianchetto the bishop. But the second is to put the light squared bishop on f5. Now you might look at this and say, well, this looks terrible. You're allowing white to ruin your pawn structure. But positionally, this is actually very interesting because these two pawns, they create a stronghold for the knight on e4. And the open g file often results in black's favor. So these types of positions are very double-edged. So anyways, we're not going to spend too long in the opening. White played c3. We responded with the principled move e5. Of course, here you could also play g6. This is a viable alternative. So e5, de, knight takes e5. Knight to f3. This is the positional line. There is also queen e2. This is the second theoretical move. And here, there is a very interesting pawn sacrifice. You go knight e4. You sack the pawn on e4, and you go queen to e7, setting up the threat of knight d3 check. Also very theoretical line. Tons of GMs play this stuff. You guys can explore. If you're interested in this, you're a Caro-Kann player, you can explore this on your own. You can analyze with an engine. But just kind of alerting you to the presence of these lines. So knight f3 is a more annoying move, I think. Knight takes d3, queen takes d3. And actually, I did confuse the theory. Apparently, and let me confirm this with ChessBase, but apparently, if I'm reading this right, bishop e7 actually is the most popular move. Yes, no, actually, so bishop e7 and bishop d6 are both popular. I see a ton of grandmasters play both moves. But apparently, bishop e7 is very popular, and I guess black is so solid here that, you know, these GMs don't mind playing passively. Castles, castles, bishop e3, and you get a position like this. You get a position like this. I see, for example, the game Grandelius against Hari Krishna from 2021. Goryachkina against Vincent Keimer. Tons of Grandmaster games here. Tons of Grandmaster games. I think that white is a smidge better here. But again, black has the bishop pair. The pawn on d5 is extremely well protected. It's going to be incredibly hard for white to actually win the IQP. Keimer? Isn't it like Keimer? Okay, I apologize if I mispronounced Keimer. Hari Krishna played knight e4. Hari Krishna played knight e4. This was an online game. Well, the IQP is important because it's a very common pawn structure that you should learn how to play with both sides. And as with all such pawn structure, the IQP is a window. It's a prism through which you can learn positional principles. right? By learning how to play with and against the IQP, you're not just learning about these structures, you're learning about positional chess in general. Knight e4 by Hari Krishnan. This position is frequently played as well. But we played bishop d6. That is also very popular. I see 88 games in the database. Bishop d6. Castles, castles. Bishop g5. Still over 50 games in the database. Still over 50 games in the database. And h6 is indeed the main move. Still 38 games. And here there's a fork in the road. Now what's really interesting, I had a game here in Title Tuesday 1 year ago against Vitaly Bernatsky. Almost all of the grandmasters play bishop h4. So this is, I think, where white makes the first serious inaccuracy. Bishop takes f6, I think, is way too risky. Even though technically it's almost as popular as bishop h4. I see bishop h4 21 games and bishop takes f6 15 games. But bishop takes f6 scores very poorly. Bishop takes f6 scores very poorly. Because, as you guys could tell, this type of position is very, very risky. So bishop h4 is the best move. And now the line continues g5, bishop g3, and knight e4. It's very important for black, for the side with the IQP, to play actively. So blue-bound played knight e4, but the main move is bishop takes g3, fg, and then knight e4. Or even g4, I see, has been played 7 times. Dronavale Harika. Robert Hess? Oh, no. M. Hess had a game here. I don't know who M. Hess is. 2441. Maubert. Some people played like this. Some people played like this. If I remember correctly, the engine evaluates these types of positions as approximately equal. Very double-edged. Black has active pieces, but black has a weakened king and an IQP. So, again, you can explore these positions if you are interested. But let's get to the actual meaty part of the game. Takes and takes on d5. Now, this is not a novelty. I still see games in the database with these moves. 6 games. Rook d8. And 5 of those games actually continued queen to h5. 5 of the 6 games continued queen to h5. Interesting stuff. Yeah, queen to h5, which probably is the best move. Now I see that Alexei Sorokin, a grandmaster, played g6 here with black. And one of the games continued queen takes h6. Oh, this is so cool. Look at this idea. Queen takes h6. Now you play bishop f4. The queen is not trapped, queen h4. Now you play g5. Queen h5, and let's see who can figure out a crushing move here for black. Let's see who can figure out a really strong move for black. So this is a game between an 1800 and a 2300. King g7, very good. And rook h8 is basically unstoppable. White ended up giving up the piece. Knight takes g5, queen takes g5. And even though white has technically 3 pawns for the piece, white's development is crap. And the moment the knight moves away, the rook infiltrates d2. So black is winning here. So queen h5, g6 is extremely dangerous for white. Queen takes h6 is a mistake. But in the other game to reach this position, queen h4 was played. Sorokin, grandmaster, played g5. Queen h5, bishop f5. And you get a similar position to the game where black has a huge initiative. Black has a huge initiative. So queen e4 is a novelty, but it walks right into bishop f5. I think the reason people were playing queen h5 is just because they did not want the bishop to develop with tempo, right? So queen takes b7 I did not take seriously, largely because we have rook a b8, queen takes a7, and rook takes b8. I mean, look at this position. We also get a rook on the second rank. This just has to be amazing for black. This has to be amazing for black. Not a serious move. Queen e3 is very logical. So again, queen e2 loses the game, loses material to bishop d3. And if queen takes d3, the other bishop drops into h2, paying the king a visit. The queen is lost. This is a very important theme in this game. Where else could the queen have gone? Not too many other good places. Not too many other appetizing places. So queen e3 makes a lot of sense. So here we spent a deal of time. And I think I found the best move. Bishop d3 just looks incredibly strong. Stop me if any of these moves are not making sense. But I explained this during the game. Bishop d3, setting up bishop f4, continuing to toss the queen around, continuing to use our bishops to tighten the screws on white's position. Rook d1. Yeah, but the other idea was bishop c7. So this was the slightly more subtle approach. Bishop c7, yeah. I was also looking at this move, which has two ideas. The first is to drive the rook into d3, and the second is to reroute the bishop to b6. Why did I reject this? Ultimately, I rejected this because of knight d4. And obviously, you can't play rook d3. You can't play rook d3. You can play bishop b6, but remember, when you are down a pawn, your opponent can use that pawn as a bargaining chip. You can say, okay, I'm going to give the pawn back, but in the time that you spend taking it, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. So what would be a good practical move here for white? Most of you probably are tempted to play rook d1, but what would be the safer option for white here? It would be knight d2, exactly. And it's very important to be able to play such moves. Now you're saying, oh, but this gives away the pawn. But that's the whole point. Yes, white gives the pawn away. I would even prefer to be black is a little bit more active in this endgame, but white should not have too many problems holding this because the structure is symmetrical. M24, thank you for the subs. 10 subs to the community. Love it, love it, love it. Thank you. Oh, apologies for that. So that's why I rejected it. If after bishop c7, white goes knight b2, then I think the idea works to perfection. We go rook d3. We can double rooks. But this knight d4 idea really spoils the party. So for that reason, I thought we have to play with bigger sense of urgency, and that's why bishop d3 was played. Okay. So rook e8 traps the queen, right? Traps the queen. The queen has no squares because the bishops are controlling all of them. Domination. Nomadic asks, where? Queen c1 where? I'm not sure where you're suggesting queen c1. Because here queen c1 is impossible. The bishop controls that square. So queen c5 is literally forced. And this was an important moment. This is a very complicated moment. Why? What makes something complicated? Well, the most classic definition of a position being complicated is when you have a lot of candidate moves. When you have a lot of candidate moves, that automatically makes a position harder to process. And I hope that the logic behind b6 makes sense to everybody. I figured that we won't damage our position by forcing the queen onto an inferior square. Now, you might say, well, how do you know that the a3 square is inferior? Well, I think I'm using a heuristic, right? If I'm forcing the queen to the side of the board, the queen is going to be doing less. And I literally almost trapped the queen later on, so I think this was justified. So if you bring the bishop back to d6, then the queen can just move back to e3 and you repeat the position. Remember that the bishop literally just came from there. So if you want to make a draw, yeah, you can go bishop d6, but the queen just drops back to e3. I also considered, of course, the move bishop e2. A lot of you thought that this was winning. It's not winning. Rook takes d8, rook takes d8, and to the rescue comes not this move, this blunders the knight, but knight f3 to d4. And this is frickin' public enemy number one. This is what I was up against the whole game. This knight d4 move is so annoying. And I didn't see a follow-up in this position. Now, I thought in this position, maybe we can go, for example, bishop f4 to b8. What is the idea of the move bishop b8? And remember this type of idea because it's going to recur. So what is the purpose of dropping the bishop back in general? Well, it's to set up what? It's to set up queen f4. It's to set up a battery, and that battery is going to yield 2 mate threads. But unfortunately, I calculated the following line. Knight d2. And at first glance, you might, queen f4 is a fork. We fork the knight and the other knight. And if knight takes e2, then queen h2, king f1, queen h1 mate. But then you look a little bit more carefully, it's not mate. White has knight g1, blocking the check. And if we play bishop h2, it still looks like it should be mate, but it's not. The other knight comes to the rescue, knight f3. and black loses. And if we play rook takes d2, then queen c8 check, and white wins the bishop and wins the game. Black's attack fizzles out. So I calculated this line. By the way, after queen f4, even if knight takes e2 failed, white also has the move knight f3, defending h2. The other knight defends the knight on f3. Look at this division of labor for white, and everything is held together. Everything is held together. So that was rejected. I rejected bishop e4 for a very similar reason, because rook takes d8 and knight d4, and I didn't quite figure out what, whoops, not rook d7, but takes knight d4, and I didn't understand why the bishop is better placed on e4 than it is on e2. Also, after bishop e4, white has a very annoying second move. Can anybody find it? Other than rook takes d8 check, who can spot the second annoying idea? And it's not knight d4, because if you go knight d4 here, and I also calculated this, what is the drawback of the move knight d4? Well, it opens up the light squared bishop. What is the light squared bishop doing? Well, it's pressuring the pawn on g2. Can we increase the pressure on the pawn on g2? We can. We can play queen g6. What do we notice here? We notice two things. The first, we're threatening mate. Our bishops can be used as battering rams. If the pawn goes to g3, we automatically take on g3 and we're crushing. If the pawn goes to f3, we take on f3, using the pin against the rook on d1. If the knight takes, then we win the rook and we win the game. It's mate. But unfortunately, there is the move knight b to d2. Developing, attacking. The line does not end there. The line does not end there. Black has a move which may seem to win material. Bishop c2. And you think, I'm attacking the rook, and the rook has to move, and then you take the knight on d2. Unfortunately, if you look concretely, white has rook c1, attacking the bishop. And if the bishop moves away, the rook moves back to d1, and I was not able to find a follow-up here either. I think white holds on. So this took me a while to calculate, and on the basis of these lines, I decided that we're going to play b6 and see how that impacts the game. So b6, queen b4, a5, continuing to chase the queen around, and here I think white made a critical mistake. Here I think, actually maybe not, because if white plays queen a4, no, actually I do think that white made a mistake. But I'm not totally sure, because wherever the queen goes, we can continue tossing the queen around. If queen b3, we can play a4. If queen a4, we can play b5. And in either way, we continue tossing the queen around. We continue tossing the queen around. So, again, this is what lends the position a tremendous deal of complexity. The fact that white has a million alternatives and black has a million alternatives, and who the heck knows where white should put his queen? It's impossible to say. So queen b4 and queen a3 makes a lot of sense. The one thing I will say is that if white had been going to a3, he should have gone queen a3 immediately. Can anybody explain to me why it is a bad idea to induce the move a7, a5? Why does the pawn being on a5 favor black? And if you paid attention to the way the game went, this should be an easier question. More escape squares, yes, that's true. But the main reason, if you remember, later in the game, I played the move bishop d6. And when the pawn is on a5, after bishop d6, b4, we can play a takes b4 and open up an attack on the queen. Here, if black ever plays bishop d6 and white plays b4, the queen is safe. With the pawn on a5, there's the move a takes b4. So the pawn on a5 restricts the queen further and makes b4 less effective. So again, hard to see. So another critical position here. Now, with the queen on a3, you have to recalculate the same lines that we calculated before. So I took a look at bishop e2. I took a look at this position. But even with the queen banished to a3, I did not find a way forward. Maybe the engine will see something here. Maybe there's a crazy move like bishop f3, or maybe there's a quiet move like queen g6. There's an amazing idea. I originally was tempted by queen g6 with the idea of putting the bishop on f3. Remember that the knight cannot move because of the back rank mate. Who can spot a very nasty move here for white? Not king h1, folks. I think white wins material. LPDO. The rook on d8 is undefended. The bishop on e2 is incredibly vulnerable. Remember that pieces that were 1 second ago incredibly passive can become game-winning pieces. Queen a3 to e7, forking the rook and the bishop on e2, and the queen can take the bishop on e2. Look how nasty and how easy this stuff is to miss, especially from a distance. So after further reflection, I all of a sudden realized that the queen is almost trapped. And that's when I discovered the idea of dropping the bishop back to d6. But if you do it immediately, then the queen still has the b3 square. Oh my god, but oh my goodness, if you do it immediately, actually maybe it's even better. Oh, this is beautiful. After queen b3, who can tell me black's winning move? Who can tell me black's winning move? No, I think this was the way to go. I think this was the win. Or maybe not the win, but maybe at least a4. The queen has no squares. Wherever you go, bishop h2 check, and both pieces are responsible for the queen being trapped. Either the rook or the queen. Isn't that awesome? Queen b6, the queen x-rays the queen. Queen d5, the rook x-rays the queen. So white is forced to play b4. A takes b4 and queen b2. And at the very least, I think black can play bishop takes b1 and b takes c3. And I think black has to be winning here because queen b6, there's a fork with c2. Tactics absolutely everywhere. I didn't see bishop b6. I assumed that we have to cover the b3 square before going bishop d6. I made an assumption. And rook d4, I think, was an excellent defensive move. I honestly missed it. What I calculated was rook takes d8, rook takes d8, knight d4. You know the drill. And now we play bishop d6. And here's what I calculated. b4. A takes b4. Sorry. A takes b4. Queen b2. And now, black, I think, has a simplifying combination that wins the game. I think the simplest here for black is to play what? Who can tell me what black should do here? And I think if you are accurate, you should be able to win this handily. B takes c3. Yeah, very good. Even bishop h7 is crushing. Yeah, bishop h7 or bishop g6 is just totally crushing because white is completely and utterly paralyzed. Very instructive move, by the way. But if you want to play concretely, I think you can play bishop b takes c3. Queen takes bishop, queen takes knight. If queen takes c3, this is checkmate. If knight takes c3, then we go... Oh, we go rook c8. Oh, but here white has rook d1, so maybe this is a little bit more complicated, even though this is probably still winning. I agree with Jose, and I think that black should just drop the bishop back to g6, and it's complete and total paralysis. Just look at this position. And make sure you understand why black is winning here, because that's very instructive. Black is completely winning here. It's probably +7. Because the moment you play c takes b4, the knight loses its defender, and black skewers the knight 500 different ways. Does that make sense? So for that reason, rook d4 is an excellent defensive move. Rook d4 instead of rook takes d8 check. Okay. So we play bishop d6, white plays b4. And of course, the key difference is that the d file is now being debated. Black is not controlling the d file. So we play a takes b4. Now, I almost played bishop takes b4. Which is another move that has to be calculated. What is the purpose of bishop takes b4? Well, here's what I calculated. If white plays c takes b4, then we play rook takes d4, knight takes, queen takes, and black is doing great. The rook is hanging. The rook is hanging. White can defend with knight c3. Now, what should black do here? Subs are always appreciated, but never obligatory. Black to play and find the most accurate move. Rook c8, excellent. I love that you guys weren't attracted with queen takes b4 is winning, but rook c8 simply wins the knight. If queen c3, then we have a choice, queen d1 check, or queen takes c3 and ab followed by b3. And this is even easier. We play b3 and then b2 is unstoppable. The rook is hanging if white takes on b3. So that's all good and well and good, but it's not checkers. And after bishop takes b4, white can drop the queen back to Tim Cannon Poker with a 5. Oh man, what a hype stream. More subs. More subs. Thank you. I appreciate it. Ole canole. All right, guys, give me another second. All right. So bishop takes b4, queen b2, and I simply did not find a good follow-up here. Does that make sense so far? Is everybody following the arc of the game thus far? So for that reason, we play a takes b4, and after queen b2, another very important position occurs. So what's happening here? What's going on? Well, this is a pretty simple position. The bishop is hanging, and we do not want to play bishop takes b1. It is not in our best interest to trade pieces here, because with every trade, white's defensive task becomes a little bit easier. And after rook takes b1, at best, maybe black is slightly better, but I don't even think black can get a slight advantage here. Oh, it's the top engine move, so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is the best way to go. Rook takes a2. Maybe you go like this. Maybe you go like this and win a pawn. Not sure. And if rook takes b6 here, can anybody spot the game-winning tactic for black? Can anybody spot the game-winning tactic for black? I didn't see any of this. To be completely honest with you, I did not even consider bishop takes b1. Because why would you give away one of your amazing bishops for white's undeveloped knight? But I guess concretely, and we'll check this with the engine, concretely black wins on a2. Yeah, bishop h2. Bang, 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 bang. Rook takes b6 and bishop h2 check. And after knight takes h2, queen takes b6, we're simultaneously defending the rook on d8. Black wins. Or sorry, no, here you have mate. Here you have mate. But of course, white will play king h2. And after queen b6, black should be able to win. So instead, I decided to keep the bishops and keep the tension. Bishop g6. C takes b4. So now it would be very nice if we could play the move bishop e5, but we can't. Because remember, the dark-squared bishop is crucial because the bishop is controlling h2. So in order to keep alive the threat of back rank checkmate, we must keep the bishop alive. If you play bishop e5, that's a horrible blunder because you give away the bishop and you're like, oh, this is checkmate. It's not mate anymore. You've given away your dark-squared bishop, so the king is h2. At best, you can win back the knight, but black is going to be down a pawn. So for that reason, I decided on the same idea, but different execution. Bishop drops back to c7. And the whole point here is that if white takes on d8 and then takes on f6 and tries to simplify, white is one move away from completing his development, but this is where the mate happens. Rook d1 and rook takes c1 is checkmate. Rook d1 and rook takes c1 is checkmate. So where does that leave us? So in this position, white, our opponent, played the move knight c3. And here the game enters the sort of decisive stage where we try to win this knight. I think, and we will check this with the engine, I think white's decisive mistake was to play rook takes d8 check and give away the d file. I think giving away the d file is something that white simply cannot afford to do in this endgame. Who can tell me what white's alternative was in this position? What was white's alternative? And not just alternative, I think the only way to stay in the game. Yeah, NBD2. NBD2. Remember, if you play rook d2, people are forgetting about the back. Do not forget about the back rank mate. Queen b2, rook d1 is simply checkmate. Knight bd2, I think, holds on amazingly. I think white holds here. Rook takes d4. And now I think even queen takes d4 holds. So what I actually missed initially, I thought that we could take and play bishop e5. And I thought that this pin would be devastating, but simply white plays knight df3. And okay, black is not worse here. Obviously, we have two amazing bishops, but white should be able to hold a draw at this point. So amazingly, after knight bd2, I do not see a clear way for black to gain the advantage. I just don't see. Difficult move to play, just keeping the tension. Our opponent very understandably wanted to release the tension and play knight c3, but after rook d3, all of a sudden, the problems that are facing white become insurmountable. Now, all of this hinges on one very important tactic. Knight a4 unpins the queen and offers a queen trade. Looks pretty good for white. Who can spot the game-winning tactic? And I mentioned this during the game, so if you were paying attention, you should know what it is. Probably not the only win here, but it's definitely the simplest. It's definitely the simplest. Yeah, rook takes f3. Notice that this defends the queen simultaneously. So if queen takes f6, we play rook takes f6 and we win the piece. Gf3, bishop e5, pinning the queen and winning the rook, and black is going to be up a piece. Now, probably you can play queen g5 check here and mate the king. My guess is that there is a mating attack here somewhere to be found, but in your pocket, you have bishop e5. That means white must defend the knight, and the only way to do that is rook c1. But now the rook is vulnerable, so we play bishop f4. And after rook c2, this is maybe the toughest position of the whole game for me. I could not for the life of me find the winning move here. So most of you are probably like, why the hell didn't you go rook takes f3? But first of all, queen takes c3. It's an illusion. It looks like it's mate. And after rook takes c3, it is indeed checkmate, rook d1. But queen takes c3. Rook d1, checkmate. It's not checkmate. White plays knight e1 and the queen defends the knight, and white survives. And white survives. And after bishop takes c2, it may seem that black has compensation. Who can spot the winning idea for white? White has a very pretty geometric move that wins immediately. Who can find it? Queen c8 check, very good. Queen takes c2, and you win the rook. So, that doesn't work. Rook takes f3. Of course, I was as tempted as you are by this move, but after gf, I could not for the life of me figure out the winning move. And maybe, we'll check with the engine, maybe rook takes f3 here was winning. Couldn't find it either. But here, the reason I rejected this is because of the following. So first of all, why not bishop takes c2? Well, here white plays queen takes c2, and white is over the worst of it, right? So what's the tempting move here? What's the tempting move here? Well, it's queen g5 check, right? Looks mating. But the problem, I think, is that the king runs toward the center, king f1. Now, you might say, oh, I see mate in 2. Bishop d3 check, king e1, queen g1 is checkmate. And it is. But of course, white can block with the knight. And in this position, I spent a while thinking about this. I couldn't find the win. Now that I look at this closer, I think queen to f5 might be a winning move. I think queen to f5 might be winning. Because it attacks the rook, but mainly it attacks the pawn. Oh, but here white has king g2. Here white has king g2. And if black takes on c2, white takes on f4, and the queen is overloaded. You either take the knight or you keep the bishop defended. So hopefully you can see that it's not as easy as it looks to win this. I'm sure that it's winning, but I just couldn't find the move. Especially in light of the fact that I found this very interesting idea, bishop f5, which I'm sure is incorrect according to the engine, but I think it's a very cool move. And the idea is to open up the g6 square for the queen. To open up that square for the queen. Why is it important to open up that square for the queen? Because if white plays a4, rook takes f3 gf, and queen g6 for Caro-Skis. For that reason, I just did not see a satisfactory defense for white. Knight e1, rook d8, and at this point, the game is over. At this point, the game is over. Because we attack the rook has to move, and now we play very simple move, bishop e5. And at the end of the day, what kills white, fittingly enough, is the knight on c3. That is what loses the game for white. And what's interesting is that we have used the d file to our advantage, but we actually exit the d file to win the game. We play rook c8, and the game is over. how to find a move like, well, you have to not lose sight of the overall sort of dynamic of the position. The fact of the matter is that the knight on c3 is white's weakest piece. It's white's weakest piece. So yes, you can go after white's king, but ultimately going after the knight on c3 makes the most sense. Now, maybe white has some sort of computer defense here. I don't see it. I just don't see it. I think black is already winning. Now we're going to check with the computer. We're going to check a couple of critical moments. We're not going to check every line, every critical moment. First thing we're going to check, we're going to look at... Okay, so rook d8, bishop f5, bishop d3 is correct. Yep, top move. Actually, the only move to get an edge. b6 is also correct. Okay, bishop b2 actually was very good here. Rook d8, knight d4. Oh, and bishop d6. Ah, queen b3, queen f4. Queen b3, queen f4, knight takes c2. Check, check. Oh, and now bishop h2. We literally looked at an almost identical idea, but there, the knight was on d2, so the knight could jump into f3 to the knight's rescue. Here, the knight cannot do that, so we play queen takes g1 and we win. Amazing. Amazing. So bishop e2 was winning, but a5 is good. Bishop c2 is not good. Bishop e2 was the winning move. I simply missed the idea of going bishop d6 and queen f4. I underestimated it. I underestimated that idea. So instead we went bishop c2, rook d4, very strong. Bishop d6 is good. b4, we're still winning. Yeah, bishop takes b1 actually was the top engine move, but bishop g6 keeps a big advantage. And bishop c7 is a mistake. Apparently bishop f8 was the move. And the idea is to keep in contact with the pawn on b4 so that after rook takes d4, we can trade queens, take b4, and black is much better because the bishops are totally monstrous here. Totally monstrous. Totally monstrous. Bishop c7, and as we predicted, this is the decisive mistake. Knight bd2, and white is only slightly worse. Black actually has nothing better than to take on d4. So amazing defense by our opponent up until the very last moment. Yep, bishop f5, it's the second move. Look, bishop f5 is the second engine move. It's almost as good as rook takes f3 and bishop e5. If not better, it's literally just as good. So bishop f5, I'm proud of finding. Rook d8, and bishop e5 is correct. So at the end, I played very accurately. At the end, I played very accurately. So just a really, really interesting game. Not without mistakes. And as you can see, I also made mistakes in handling the complexities of the position. But, you know, I found good moves when push came to shove. But my main mistake actually was not seeing this idea of going bishop e2 either in this position or in this position. Bishop e2, takes, knight d4. I stopped calculating too soon. I didn't see bishop d6, queen b3, queen f4. With the dual threat of queen c1, queen h2, and at the end of the day, bishop h2 is crushing because the king is driven out into the wide open space and just checkmated easily. Beautiful. That's a lovely game, but let's end it here because I want the YouTube video to be below 2 hours. So I want to thank everybody for watching. Thanks for hanging out, and hope you enjoyed the speedrun game. Bye.